Good morning. We are learning as chutz for Shleima Feilan Chai Baserach and Shira Bashalamis and Daf Yudalit Amud Aleph. I think that's what we're up to, right? By the two dots. That's correct. Yeah. So we're going to have to go back to the Mishnah. Rav Shimon, the Mishnah says, Rav Shimon Machshir B'Hilach. So let's see the Mishnah. Rav Shimon Machshir B'Hilach. Shaya Omer, E-Efshe Shaloi B'Shchita V'Shaloi B'Kavalav Shaloi B'Zika. Rav Shimon says that if you shecht if you do the halacha Shaloi Lishma, that's not going to passel your carbon, your Pesach or your Chatas. Because he said, the other avoid, the Shchita, Kabbalah, and Zrika, there's no way, they're unavoidable. You always have to have all these things. But it's possible to do to bring a carbon, to be makar with carbon without ever doing hilach. And how can he do that? He shechs the carbon near the mizbeach, and he immediately zayrak the dam from when you shech the carbon. The dam goes into the kli sharos. So you have the shchita and the kabbalah, and then you take the kli sharos and you fling the dam onto the mizbeach without moving anywhere. So halacha can be avoided. Therefore, he says a corollary of that is that it's not going to have a din that shaloi lishma is going to passel the carbon. Zaktima. Amr Shimon Lakish. Shimon Lakish says, Moider of Shimon. Rav Shimon, although he says that halacha, when it's avoidable, is not going to be not going to cause a psul in the carbon of a chatas and shlom when it's done shaloi lishma. But b'halachas chatois hapnimius, he's going to be masking b'halacha of a chatois hapnimius, which we said, right? Again, there's different types of chatois. The standard chatas, the dam is nizrak on the mizbeach hachitzon. You do the zrikas on the corners of the mizbeach. But the chatois pnimius, the dam is brought it's not in the chotzer where the mizbeach hachitzon is, but the dam is brought into the heichal, and it's thrown over there. I think it's thrown keneged the paroiches or keneged the. I don't know. I don't remember exactly where it's thrown, but it's thrown. It goes inside the chotzer, and that will be maskim shemach shavas paisalu. Paisalas that. Rav Shimon would be an exception for what he said, that a machshava shalei l'shma b'halacha is not going to passel the carbon, because over here you always hayil v'avodah she'en yachal levadla, because over there the halacha is mandated. Since you have to shech the carbon in the chatzar, and you have to be zayrik the dam bifnim, and you're not allowed to shecht bifnim, it's not a place for shchitas, so you're always going to have halacha. So since halacha is necessary, so therefore it's going to also, if you have a machshavas l'shma, it's going to pass. Correct the Gemara. The Gemara says, but we have a different sheet of Rav Shimon's, which will l'chayra blow up this exception that you're trying to make. You're trying to say the chatois hapnimis are an exception to Rav Shimon's din, that Rav Shimon's halacha that he says in the Mishnah, that halacha is not going to pass, the Shema is not going to pass by halacha because it's not necessary. By Pechados Pnimis, it is necessary. Rav Shimon says that any carbon that is not brought on the Mizbeach HaChitz, in which Chatois Pnimius are squarely within that definition, they're not brought on the Mizbeach HaChitz, and rather they're brought Bifnim. So anything which is not like a Shlom, Ein Chayav Mishum Pigel. It's not going to have a din Pigel. And the Gemara at this point is understanding that Rav Shimon L'chayr would apply that to all the different machshavas. Just like he says that the Torah, we learn everything from Shlamim. So not just Pigel is going to be excluded from something, from a carbon that is not brought on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, but also Shaloi Lishma, and also Chutz L'Mkaimai, whatever machshav he has that passels, is not going to passel because it's not going to be similar to Shlamim. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, so it's shver on Rish Lakish's exception. Rabbi Chanina says no. Rabbi Chanina says Rabbi Chanina says Rav Shimon would be maskim that it's possible from a kal v'chayim. Mashaloi l'shmon shehuchru shuru b'shlomim. Possible. L'chatas chutz l'zmanoi possible. I'm sorry. Mashaloi l'shmon shehuchru b'shlomim. If someone does a machshava shaloi l'shmon by a shlomim, so it's not going to passel the carbon like we know. That's the first thing we said in the first Mishnah, that the other karbanos other than chatas and Pesach, that you do shaloi l'shma are possible le'ol b'alim shem chayva. But it's possible b'chatos. But if you make the machshava shaloi l'shma by a chatas, it passels. Chutz l'zmanoi, the machshavas pigel, which is also going to passel, which comes from machshavas chutz l'zmanoi shepaisel b'shlomim. That unlike shaloi l'shma, machshavas chutz l'zmanoi does passel l'shom. Ein edin sheyisel b'chatoyis. Certainly, it should passel by chatoyis. He's saying we should learn out that pigel should be passel by chatoyis apnimius. So he's saying, what he's trying to say is, it's a careful point. He's talking about, he's saying that although Reb Shimon says, pigel, what it just means to say is, it's not going to have that very specific din of pigel. What is pigel different than all the other machshavas that passel? That it also has a chiv karis. So he's saying all that Reb Shimon means to say is that the chiv karis does not apply to chatoyis that are not chatoyis, that chatoyis apnimius, or chatoyis that are not on the mizbeach hachitzon. It means the Torah said a din of shlamim, and we learn out, and pigel is said by shlamim, but that din of pigel that you get karis doesn't extend to cases that are not similar to it. That means where it's not on the mizbeach hachitzon, but all the other din of sulim, the din of shaloi l'shma that it passels, that will be able to make a kal v'chayim. If, like we said, if shaloi l'shma is kosher by shlamim, is possible by chatos, so certainly the din of the psul that comes with a pigel is going to apply by chatos. So that's what the Gemara says. Ashkam chutz l'zmani. So we found chutz l'zmani, and it's also going to include shaloi l'shma. We're saying it's only because shaloi l'shma, because you'll be able to learn shaloi l'shma from that kal v'chayim. Is that what's chutz l'zmani? Yeah. There's a cheshbon of why it's also going to conclude the Shema. I think it's a kal v'chayim that we had said previously. If chutz l'zmanai, which is mechayev karas, and certainly it's going to be, if it passes by chutz l'zmanai, it's certainly going to be mechayev by l'shma, which is easier to be mevatel, like we see that it only passes by chatas and Pesach. So exactly. So we found chutz l'zmani, chutz l'mkaima minalin. How are we going to know that a machshavas chutz l'mkaima, according to Rav Shimon, is going to passel? If you say learn it out from chutz l'zmani, malchus v'ashachein karas, you can't learn it out from chutz l'zmani because chutz l'zmani has a din karas, so maybe that's the reason why it passels. Means even though we're saying that there's not going to be a chiyuv karas, but there is a chiyuv karas legabe pigel. So when you have a machshavas chutz l'zmani which brings pigel, that will passel. Imishaloi l'shma, and if you're going to say you learn it out from shaloi l'shma, like we said with the kal v'chayim before, just like we said, we're learning out chutz l'zmani, and also learn out chutz l'mkaima, which is a close relative of chutz l'zmani. Right? It's a machshava. When a person has a machshava about doing the later parts of the carbon chutz l'zmani not like Shalishma, which is a Shinu Kodesh, where you have in mind that you bring this carbon now for a different carbon, but rather you're going to do a later part of the carbon of the Avodah Chutzlam Kaimai. But you can't learn out from Shaloi Lishma, Shechein Noyig Bebama, because the din of Shaloi Lishma you can find by Yabama. That means, although in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, all karbanos had to be brought on they all had to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash and done on the Mizbeh and the Chatzar and in the Heichel. But prior to the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, there were bamas that a person could do other karbanos on. So Shaloi, but you still have to do the carbon properly. So if you do a Shaloi Lishma on the bama, it's going to be possible. But there's no din of Chutzlam Kaimei on a bama, because the bama is a sort of a quasi-official makom. It doesn't have a chatzar. It doesn't have a heichel. It's just a mizbeach. So therefore, you can't learn out chutzlim kaimai, which is not applicable on a bama, from lishma, which is applicable on a bama. It has a kula. Zakt the Gemara, no, that's not a good taina. Shaloi lishman, but my noyig. Where's the shaloi lishman? Where do we find that it's possible? Meaning, it's not just that it's kosher v'leil b'am shem chayber, but it's possible, which is what we're talking about here. But Pesach v'chatas, that's the carbon Pesach and the carbon chatas. Pesach v'chatas v'bama like kervu, and you're not allowed to bring the carbon Pesach and the chatas on a bama. They're not brought on a bama, so it's not the whole discussion is not applicable to chatas and Pesach, which are the ones that are pasul l'shma. So that's one teretz. V'ba yisema hekeshu. Or I could tell you, how do we learn out chutzlam kaimai? That according to Shimon, it's going to pasul. It's going to pasul by a carbon that's that even if it's on something that's where there's not going to be a requirement that it's brought. Hekeshu shlishi zeh chutz l'zmanai. I'm sorry. Hekeshu shlishi zeh chutz l'zmanai. When the Torah says, "Bim hayachal yacham b'sar zevach shlom b'yayim hashlishi lo yiratz ha'makav v'yisel lo yichashav lo yipigol yiyah v'nefesh ha'chaz men avoy natisa." So we learn this is a hekesh. Shlishi, it says b'yayim hashlishi, the third day. So that's a reference to eating it past the time that you're allowed to eat the shlom. Shlom is only allowed to be eaten for 2 days. You say if he eats it on the third day, that's a reference to chutz l'zmani, meaning machshavas chutz l'zmani. We're going to see later on that even though the pasuk seems to be talking about actually eating chutz l'zmani, but we darshan that it's a reference to the machshavas pigel that passes. But then it says again in the pasuk pigel. We already said shlishi, which is a reference to pigel. So what is pigel? What is the word pigel in the pasuk referring to? Zeh chutzlam kaimei. That's a reference to chutzlam kaimei. It's an einay inyan. If it can't be referenced to pigel, it has to be chutzlam kaimei. And therefore, we're being makish the chutzlam zmanei to chutzlam kaimei. And on a hekesh, there's no einay shivin ala hekesh. Even though we said you can't learn out chutzlam kaimei from chutzlam zmanei because it has a din karis, but that was only when we're learning it as a mematzina. But now we're learning it as a hekesh. You can't ask that kasha, and that's how we know that chutzlam kaimei also is going to be possible. Okay. Amar Rava, Imtim Salaim Rav Shimon Savala Kabrei. If you'll say that Rav Shimon had said in our Mishnah that he was machsher behiluch. He said if your person has a machshavas shaloi l'shma while he's doing halacha, it's not going to pass because the halacha is not strictly necessary. You can always shecht your carbon right near the mizbeach, and you'll avoid hiluch. Avoid halacha, so therefore it's not something that's unavoidable. Since it's avoidable, it's not going to have a chiyuv lishma. So he says, if you'll say that Rav Shimon Savala Kabrei, he holds like his son, Rabbi Elazar, the Alma Beino Ulam Lezbeach Tzafon, he holds that so the way the Beis Hamikdash was set up is you had first the Heichel, which was the inside of the Beis Hamikdash, where you had not the Kodesh Kodashim, but the next thing, which had the Shulchan and it had the Mizbeach Hazav. Then you had a little hallway outside the entranceway into the Heichal. It was called the Ulam, and then outside of that was the Azara or the Chatzar, the Azara, and in the Azara, halfway in the middle of the Azara was the Mizbeach. So there's a din that you have to shech the carbon on the tzafan. The chatas has to be brought on the north of the mizbeach. So the question is, what does that mean? Does that mean it has to be directly north of the mizbeach, and it has to be opposite the mizbeach, or does it also include the area that's north of the mizbeach, but closer to the ulam? It means toward the west, right? The western side of the the east. The what?
East on this side is west. These directions are consistent.
Yeah. Right. So it's toward the west. I don't know. Doesn't make. Okay. Yeah. So right. The west is the western side of the Kaisel Amaravi is on the western side of the Beis Hamikdash, and that's behind the Kodesh Kodashim. So, but in any case, if the question is if that area that's in between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, but set off to the northern side, is that considered Safa? So according to that, if he holds like his son, so in that case, since you can really shecht the carbon anywhere up to the ulam, anything from anytime you shecht it over there, any halacha prior to getting to the ulam is not strictly necessary. You could always have shechted it right by the entrance to the ulam, on the tzafan side of the mizbeach, and avoided the halacha for there. So that halacha, according to Reb Shimon, would not be necessary, and therefore would not have a din that a machshavas shaloi lishma would pass. So it would only pass from be pesach ulam leflim, from inside of the pesach ulam. V'imtim saloima savala Rabbi Yehuda amar toich azara mikdash, and if he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says inside Mekadesh, inside of the Azara is Mekadesh, Legabi what we're going to see, Ein machshava me'elas b'halecha siluk bazikan, eli bezach heichal uluchotz. If you say that that the Azara is Mekadesh, the entire Azara is Mekadesh, so there's a halacha that you have to take from the lechem aponim each week. You have to take the bazichen. You have to take out and burn on the mizbeach the spoons of levina as part of the weekly lechem aponim service. So if you hold you could burn any place is mekadesh, and you could burn it any place in the azara. So it's only going to be. If you have a machsheves psul during that halacha, elami pesach heichel uluchotz. It's only going to passel from the doorway of the heichel and outside, but because you don't have to, you could do the bazichen, you could move the shulchan to any part of the heichel, and you could bring it right up to the ulam, and you could burn these bazichen in any place in the azara. So you could do it right on the other side of the ulam. So it's only going to be from the Pesach of the heichel into the ulam till you bring it out to the chatzar. That's going to be the only place where you're going to have a machsheves. That's the only thing that's absolutely required, that it's unavoidable, and therefore that's the only part where a machsheves shalei lishma is going to pass. And if you hold that the ulam and the heichel both have the same kedusha, so not only can you bring the shulchan anywhere in the heichel up to the entrance of the ulam, and that ulam which is that hallway entering into the the heichel. You could even bring it into the ulam. The only place that you're going to be able to have a machshavas to pass, the only thing that's you're going to be absolutely required to convey these bazichin from inside to outside, you could take your shulchan. You don't have to do it. Not only can you do it anywhere in the heichel, you could even bring it into the ulam. And once you bring it from the ulam into the chotzer, you could burn it right away as soon as you get into the chotzer. So there's only one place that you have to carry it, and that's Pesach ulam ulachutz. The ulam itself had a doorway. It had very thick stone walls. So that doorway had I think a couple of amas of width to it. So inside the doorway is no longer considered. You can't bring the shulchan into there, and it's not yet considered the chotzer that you could shecht over there. So from the entranceway to the ulam and outside, meaning inside the doorway of the ulam. But if you'll say that within the width of the doorway itself is treated as part of the ulam, so you can even bring the shulchan there. The machshava of having a machshava shaloi l'shma on these bazichin, when you're taking them out, it's not going to be a machshava to passel even for one step. Only thing it's going to help for is the amount that you have to stretch out your hands. Lamaisa, you have to stretch your hand from the heichel, let's say even inside the doorway of the ulam. You can't take it into the azara. So you might see the levina from the shulchan over there, and then you have to stretch out your hand. That part is going to be necessary. And finally, if you're going to hold, as we're going to see on the next plot, there's a shita that holds that halacha is only when you actually move yourself. Halacha that comes about just by standing in one place and moving with your arms from one place to another, that's not called a halacha. So this also is not a halacha, stretching it from inside the doorway of the ulam into the chatzar, and therefore you're never going to have. If Rav Shimon would say this is another example, where according to Rav Shimon, there's not going to be a machshavas l'shma, shaloi l'shma in the halacha. Amalei Abai la'amireh de Rav Chizda. Abai said to the speaker, the person who said over b'shem Rav Chizda, he was his spokesman. Boy, my name Rav Chizda. Do me a favor, ask Rav Chizda the following question: Halacha bezar mahu. What's the din to do a halacha with a zar? Can a zar do halacha? We know a zar can do shchita, and we probably also know that a zar can't do halacha. But we're going to see what if there's possibly an exception. If there maybe the Gemara is going to suggest maybe there's a Manda Amr who disagrees with this.
Because to do shchita outside of the azara?
No, we're talking about with a zar, with someone who's not a kohen.
Well, but isn't the zar not allowed to come to the there?
No, he can go. A zar can't go into the chatzah. I mean, I think it comes out that a zar rarely can do it, and I think the Gemaras discuss it later exactly how it works. But is you saying a zar shouldn't be allowed? If the shechita has to be in the azara, how can a zar do it? I don't know. When we get to that, we'll get to it. But it's definitely the case that a zar is allowed to do shechita. I think I'm pretty certain that it's extremely rare. It's difficult for a zar to do shechita, and usually it was done by kahana. Maybe because there were specific spots that have a din chatzar, but it's a zar is allowed to go in there. That's also on the tzafon for chatas. I don't know exactly. I don't remember this yet. I'm sure we'll get to it. But in any case, we're talking now about a zar doing halacha. Amalek Shera. He says it's kosher. A zar can do halacha. This is a very strange. He says, Omikra Misayani. I have a Mishnah. I have a pasuk that tells this to me. The pasuk says, "Vayishchatu as a pasach." They shechted the Pesach. That means a zar can shech the Pesach. Vayizruku ha'kayanim es hadam. And the kayanim was zoyrek the dam miyadam, from their hands. That means from the people who shechted the Pesach. Leviim mafshitam, and then the Leviim would skin it. But it's saying that the Kohanim was zoyrek the dam, taking it from the people, with the same people who shechted the Pesach. Now we know the shechita was done by Yazar, so those are the same people that the Kohanim accepted the dam from. That means that the halacha was done by they're the ones who brought the dam to the Kohanim to do zrika.
The Kabbalah was also done by Azar.
No. It means the Kabbalah was done by a Kain. They handed over to a Yisrael, and then the Azar carried it over to the Kain. That's the way we're understanding the pasuk. Masav Rav Sheshis asks, we have often a Mishnah, Zar, someone who's a Zar, which is what we're talking about. Va'ainin, someone who was just passed away that day. Shikr, someone who's inebriated. Ubalmum, someone who's a balmum. B'Kabbalah, b'Haylacha, b'Zrika, pasul. By all three of the avodas other than shechita, they're all going to be pasul. And one of the things we say is zar. We say a zar is pasul by halacha. B'chein yoshev. Similarly, someone who's sitting is also going to pasul all the avodah. B'chein smile, and also doing it with your left hand is going to pasul. This Mishnah is a good kasha. This Mishnah says very clearly that a zar can't do Kabbalah, halacha. But what about the pasuk that Rav Chizda brought? So the Avid Maisa Itztaba, when it says over there that he took it from a Yisrael, the Yisrael was not doing anything. The Yisrael was just standing in one place with his hand out. A Kayin did the halacha, put it into the hand of the Yisrael, and then the Kayin took it from his hand. It says that's all that the Kayin, the Zar was not doing any part of the Avodah. He was just, instead of putting it down on a pedestal, putting it down on a counter, they gave it to a Yisrael to hold in one place. But he was doing neither Kabbalah, Halacha, Zrika, he wasn't doing any of that. So the pasuk is not, doesn't show anything. So certainly we're back to our original understanding that Halacha can only be done by a Kayin b'pashtus. Rabbi Rav Yosef, the Ami Shavayu, however, Rabbi Rav Yosef, even though we've come to the conclusion that the pashtus, halacha, the bizarre is pasul, they say halacha, bizarre, machlekes of Shimon Rabbanan. This goes back to our Mishnah, the sheet of Rav Shimon. As you could see on the surface, it seems very related. Rav Shimon, the Amar Avodah she'efshel avatla, an avodah that is capable. That if parts of the halacha are not necessary, lav avodahi, it's not considered an avodah. That's what he's saying. Since he's saying that it's shaloi l'shma doesn't passel, that means it's not that part is not considered an avodah. So it's ksher bizarre. Therefore, it's kosher bizarre. The Rabbanan psul, and according to the Rabbanan, it will be possible. Amalei Abaya, bashchita. If you're saying the two things go together, you're saying anything that's efshel levatla is not an avodah and can be done by a zar, and anything that's not efshel levatla is going to be an avodah, and that's what defines it. That makes that it's possible to be done by a zar. What about shechita, which you certainly have to have shechita? There's no getting around it, and even so, it can be done by a zar. Amalei. Shchita lav avodahi. He says shchita is not an avodah. That means, obviously, it doesn't mean as a general rule it's not an avodah, but it's not considered like an avodah in the sense that since it could be done by a zar. So Rashi, Taisus explains Rashi. What does that mean? This is almost like a circular reasoning. This is what we're trying to discuss, whether avodah, whether the ability to avoid it makes it into a avodah or not. So you're trying to say it's not an avodah. So Rashi shchita la'avodah v'pirush b'kuntrus l'ktaisus mit akshu b'kol apsul b'yefshel lo'imekain da hechsher zar gufa ma'isila hacha. That's what we're trying to determine. He's saying since you can always do shchitas outside of the Beis Hamikdash. You can when you just want to eat a burger, you shecht an animal, and that's not an avodah. So since he's saying that in that sense, shchita is lav and avodah, the act of shchita is be'etzem not an avodah. So in that sense, it's different. It could be done by a zar. Correcting Mara of law is that true? Amar of Zera Amarav, shchita's para, the shchita of the para aduma, bizarre psul. It's possible by a zar. Amarav Allah. Allah is a bechukak sibba. Since it says the Torah says Zayis chukas atayra shivesh olema davam leisav yichol lecha para aduma tumi masher embam Allah. Nasad moisa Allah zar akayin. You give it to Allah zar v'haitzi. So it says Zayis chukas atayra, which is a mashmoyis that it's required, and it says Elazar. It says it has to be done by Elazar, who was a kayin. So you see that shchita. How could you say shchita is lav avodah? But we see that the Torah that because you're saying that it's never, as a general rule, it's not required. But we see that it is required in the context of paraduma. So shani para the kache by the kabayasi. No, that's not. You can't bring a raya from paraduma. Paraduma is not a carbon that's kachim. It's just the animal itself is given over to be used by for the needs of the Beis Hamikdash, but it's not an actual carbon. So that's so therefore that's the reason that could be why it's required that it needs a kain. You're trying to say that we're excluding para. That's not a raya because it's lav avoidi. That it's an avoida. So if it's something that's not because it's not bedek abayis, because it's not kachri kachim, it's not the same thing. But it's worse. It's kachri bedek abayis, and even so, it's a din of avoida. So certainly by something which isn't avoida, by a regular carbon, that the shchita should be considered an avoida. Midi have amaris negoyim the lav avoidi. Where it says no, it's that which you need a kayin by paraduma. It's an outside. It's a irrelevant. It's nothing to do with the avodah or lav avodah status. It's like the din that you have to have a kayin shek negayim, which has nothing to do with it's being. There's no avodah of checking of maros negayim. It's just a requirement of kehanim. So almost like that which a kayin has to not go into basic forest. It's a din of kahuna that, or it's a special. You need a kayin for it, but it's not a din avodah. So just like Amar is going the lav avodah ubayikun, just like checking Mitzayra, it's not avodah and needs kuna. So this also is lav avodah and still needs. So that's the same thing, the paraduma. So that has no effect. What about the din that we say that you need to have a kohen carry the limbs that are going to be burnt on the mizbeach, and the Torah says that the kohen has to do it. It's something that you could check the carbon right near the kevesh, right near the ramp that goes up to the mizbeach, and there it won't require any halacha upsula bizarre, and nevertheless it's going to be possible. The Torah says about the bringing the emurim to the kevesh, that the kohen has to bring it and be makdir on the mizbeach. So you see that even something that is not can be avoided still has a din that it must be done only by a kohen. It's like no, over there there's a pasuk. The pasuk told you to do it, therefore you got to do it. But if the Torah told you that you have to do this with a kohen, even though this is not it's already after the kapara. They already did the zrika. The halachas zevarim is later on, like we've seen a number of times. It's if you don't do it, the person still doesn't have to bring another carbon. You already got his kapara. Halachas dam, bring the dam, the ma'akva kapara, like kol shekain. L'chayr it's a kal v'chaymer, that should also require a zar. If menami amar ula amar avalaza halacha b'zar psula afilu l'erev shemin. And that's the way we come, that it's unavoidable that even according to Rav Shimon, according to everyone, halacha bizarre is psula, halacha itself is considered an avoida. Like we said, we just brought a kal v'chaymer from the bringing the emurim to the keves, certainly bringing the dam is not going to be any worse. And even according to Shimon, you're going to need a kain. Okay, we'll stop over here. Shreich to you. I don't know when the day is going to come that we're going to do more than a blot. This is
Hard, but
It's very hard.